You ever get that feeling, like when you pick up a prescription at the pharmacy and it's like way more than you thought it was going to be?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and you're suddenly like, okay, dinner or medication this week.
Right.
It's like, seriously, it's happened to me more times than I can count.
Oh, that pharmacy sticker shock is definitely real. And it seems like it's becoming more and more common for so many people these days.
It's like a gut punch,
Yes.
honestly. And the thing is, we hear all the time about these rising healthcare costs. We see the headlines, we see the articles, but then like you actually start digging into the reports and it's like, whoa, this is way more widespread than I even realized.
It really is. One of the articles that you sent over, the one from West Health, had this statistic that really just like stopped me in my tracks. 30%, so that's 3 in 10 Americans, have actually put off going to the doctor or even filling a prescription because of the cost just in recent months.
3 in 10, that's huge.
It's a lot of people.
And that's not even just like a one-time thing. This was triple what it was just the year before.
Yeah, this isn't like I'm going to skip my annual checkup. This is people having to make really, really difficult choices between, their health and just basic needs.
Yeah, and it's not even just people without insurance. The article even mentioned there was this senior fellow at Brookings, Andre Perry, and he was talking about how even he had to delay getting dental work done because the cost was just so high. And he has insurance.
You bring up a good point. Having insurance isn't a free pass. Even if you have it, there are still copays and deductibles. All that stuff adds up. And Perry's experience, I think, really highlights just how widespread this problem is. Like we were talking about people across income levels feeling the squeeze.
Yeah, it's like this perfect storm brewing, you know? You got rising healthcare costs. You've got wages that have stayed pretty much the same. And then you've got insurance that seems like it's covering less and less. And it's kind of scary, honestly, especially when you start to look at how it impacts certain communities. The West Health article even talked about how Black and brown Americans are particularly vulnerable.
Yeah, and the statistics around this are really upsetting. The article actually highlighted that 8% of Black Americans, they actually know someone personally, who died in the past year because they just couldn't afford the care they needed. That's double the rate of white Americans. Just let that sink in for a second.
It's awful. I mean, it's one thing to talk about the financial strain, which is very, very real.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that we're talking about people dying because they can't afford to get treatment,
Mm-hmm.
that's a whole other level of awful.
And it really speaks to a much deeper issue in our healthcare system. This isn't just about, making healthcare cheaper. This is about making sure everyone has access to it, no matter, their background or how much money they make.
It's easy to point the finger at like big pharma, right? Like they're an easy target.
Right.
But, I was reading through that Center for American Progress report that you sent over,
Mm-hmm.
and man, it's so much more complicated than that. It's like this whole web of different groups that are all part of setting these drug prices.
It's a system, definitely.
It really is.
Yeah, and it's not just one bad guy, right? You've got manufacturers, wholesalers, you've got the pharmacies themselves, insurance companies, and then there's this whole other thing, pharmacy benefit managers.
PBMs.
PBMs, yeah.
Okay, full disclosure, I had to Google that. What even are those? Like, what do they do?
So PBMs, you can kind of think of them as like the middlemen in the whole pharmaceutical world.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are negotiating between, your insurance plan
Okay.
and the drug manufacturers. So they're basically deciding which drugs your insurance is going to cover and then also how much you're going to have to pay for them.
So they have a lot of power in this whole thing.
A lot of power. Yeah, they're the ones managing those formularies,
Right.
Those lists of drugs that your insurance plan is like, we prefer these ones.
Yeah.
And they're the ones negotiating all the rebates and the discounts with the drug companies.
Okay, so then how does this spread pricing thing
Yeah.
work? Because that's what the Center for American Progress report really digs into. And that's where I was like, wait, what? Like
Yeah.
my head was spinning trying to follow like where the money was going.
Yeah, no, it's definitely confusing. So basically, spread pricing is when a PBM, they charge the insurance company one price for a drug,
Okay.
but then they only reimburse the pharmacy a lower amount.
Oh, wow.
So they're pocketing the difference.
So they're basically like marking up the price even more, but it's all happening like behind the scenes.
Exactly. It's happening behind the scenes. And, the Center for American Progress, they give this example. They say, let's pretend a drug, it costs $1,000 at wholesale.
Okay.
By the time it goes through all these different players and everybody gets their cut, that $1,000 drug could end up costing you, the consumer, over $1,200.
So even that $1,000 is already marked up.
Well, the $1,000, that's just the beginning. you know?
Right.
That's just the manufacturer, they set their price, then the wholesaler, they add their markup.
Right.
Then the pharmacy, they add their dispensing fees. And then on top of all of that, you've got the PBM, they're negotiating these rebates,
Right.
but then they're potentially also engaging in spread pricing.
It's like everyone's taking a cut except for the person who actually needs the medication.
Yeah, and then you're at the pharmacy counter.
And you're like, how am I supposed to pay for this?
Right, and you're just seeing the tail end of it. You know?
Exactly. Exactly. And so you don't even realize how much went into that price tag that you're looking at the pharmacy.
It's this whole system that most people don't even know about.
Right.
And that lack of transparency just makes it so much harder to even know, like, okay, who do we blame here? It's like a big mystery.
Yeah, and I'm sure it makes it harder to fix too.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we hear a lot about how we need these high prices,
Yeah.
right? For innovation, we got to fund the research, got to fund the development. But this Center for American Progress report kind of pokes some holes in that.
Yeah, it challenges that idea.
So they're basically saying, forget about investing in the next big medical thing.
Yeah.
We're going to focus on our shareholders.
Yeah, essentially. It makes you question what their priorities really are.
Yeah.
It's like, are they really in it to, improve public health? Or are they just in it to make as much money as possible? And it seems like those two things don't always go together.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's this whole other thing, this whole patent abuse idea that the report gets into. What is that all about?
So, okay, think about it this way. You know how pharmaceutical companies, they get patents for their new drugs?
Right. To get back all the money they spent making them?
Exactly. It's so that they have the exclusive right to sell that drug for a certain amount of time.
Right.
But what some companies have gotten really good at is like gaming the system
Okay.
to make those patents last even longer. So they're creating a monopoly where they're the only ones selling it, and it prevents like competition from coming in.
Ah, so they're preventing cheaper versions, the generic drugs,
Yeah.
from coming out.
Exactly. And they do that using a bunch of different tactics. One of them is called product hopping.
Product hopping.
Yeah, so that's where a company, they'll make like just a small change to a drug.
Okay.
Maybe they change how it's delivered, like is it a pill or a liquid, or they just like slightly tweak the formula.
Right.
But the drug itself is basically the same.
Wow.
And then they use that to get a brand new patent.
So it's like putting that same old wine in a new bottle and saying, it's totally new.
Exactly.
New and improved.
Exactly. But what this does is it means that those generic versions of the drug, the cheaper ones,
Right.
they can be delayed for years.
Wow.
And the report actually, they use this example of this Alzheimer's drug, Namenda,
Okay.
and the manufacturer, Force Laboratories, they actually got sued
Oh, wow.
because they were allegedly engaging in this product hopping to try and like keep their control of the market.
Wow. So they're like actively preventing people from getting more affordable medication?
Yeah, it's a whole thing.
It's like a constant battle, it
Yeah.
feels like, for consumers.
Yeah.
So I remember, this is a while ago, during the campaign, Biden was talking about importing drugs from Canada.
Right.
Remember that? It was in the news a lot.
Yeah.
And you sent over these two articles, the
Yeah.
PolitiFact one and the AARP one.
Mm-hmm.
They both mentioned it. Did anything ever happen with that?
So it's been like a really long process, honestly. Yeah.
And I would say the results have been kind of mixed. The whole idea, right, was that Canada, they have these they negotiate these lower prices for their drugs.
Right, because their system is different.
Exactly. So the thought was if we can import drugs from Canada, that would force prices to go down here.
So it seems like it'd be good for both.
Yeah.
We get cheaper drugs, and Canada, I don't know, they get something out of it.
Well, not necessarily. Canada actually, they weren't super happy about the idea of becoming like America's drug supplier.
Right.
Because they were worried, if they start sending a bunch of their drug supply to us, that their own citizens might have shortages.
Right, because then they have a problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the FDA, they actually did approve Florida's plan, their importation plan, which was a pretty big deal because that was the first state to really get the approval to do that.
Okay, so some progress.
Yeah, progress. But
Yeah.
you know how it is.
There's always a but. And there are some experts in that PolitiFact article, they were saying they're not really sure how much it's really going to change prices for people.
Okay.
There's still a lot of logistical stuff to figure out. And even if prices do go down, it's probably going to take a while. It might not be like this huge drop that people are hoping for.
So it's a step in the right direction, but it's not like a magic solution.
Exactly. Not a magic solution at all. This whole thing is so complicated, right?
Yeah,
It's so messy. There's so many factors involved. But we can't just, like, throw up our hands and say, well, it's too hard. We give up.
exactly, yeah. We need solutions.
Exactly. And the good news is that the Center for American Progress report, they actually have some ideas about what can be done, some policy changes that they think would help.
Okay, so for our listeners out there, like, what are some of the big things that they should take away from all of this?
So one of the big ones is, remember those PBMs?
Oh, yeah, the middlemen.
The middlemen. Yeah, so there's actually a lot of support on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, for putting in some rules about how PBMs do business, specifically getting them to be more transparent about their pricing.
Okay, so they can't hide how they're marking up the prices anymore.
Exactly. Shine a light on these, like, backroom deals that are happening.
Right, make it fair.
Exactly, exactly. And then another thing that's really interesting, it's called value-based pricing.
Value-based pricing.
Yeah, so it's kind of a mouthful.
Yeah.
But basically, it means that the price of a drug should be connected to, like, how well it actually works.
Okay.
So if a drug, it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, the price should go down.
It's like you shouldn't have to pay a fortune for something that's basically a placebo.
Exactly, exactly. And then the last thing I'll say that's kind of good news, the Inflation Reduction Act, remember that?
Right.
One of the things it did is it allows Medicare to actually negotiate drug prices for certain drugs.
Okay, so that's at least good news for people on Medicare. What about the rest of us?
Well, yeah, that's the million-dollar question. It's like, this is a fight that's going to keep going, right? We have to keep talking about it. We have to keep putting pressure on people to make drug pricing fairer for everyone. And one thing that really struck me from that Association of Healthcare Journalists article, they found that drug prices here in the U.S., they're 278% higher than in other developed countries.
278%.
278%. It's wild.
It's like we're getting ripped off.
It makes you wonder, right? Like, other countries have figured this out, so why haven't we?
It's a good question, and it's one that we're going to have to keep asking.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and breaking all this down with me.
Yeah, of course.
This is one of those topics that, like, the more you learn about it, the more you realize you need to learn.
It's a deep dive, for sure.
It is. Hopefully this gives everyone listening a good starting point,
Absolutely, yeah.
some things to, like, think about, and hopefully they'll go out and learn even more. So thank you again.
Thank